Hello, everyone. So good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for an exciting discussion on powering the current and future demand surge here in the U.S. I'm Sam Ueno. I'm a partner here at West Monroe, and today I'll be your host. A few quick things I want to chat about before we get into it. Maybe a little bit about West Monroe. We're a full-service business and technology consultancy. We support utilities, businesses, and energy consumers with complex transformations necessary to safely power increasing demand from new industrial loads, data centers, and electrification. Now, with respect to achieving large energy demand, we support our clients with streamlining and automating the interconnection of new businesses, so data centers, manufacturing sites, and transportation fleets, as well as front of the meter distributed generation and behind the meter DERs. We also support the planning and deployment of advanced grid monitoring and control technologies for utilities, namely ADMS and DER management systems, so that utilities can start to increasingly manage these complex loads on the grid. We also support the siting of data centers by reevaluating and repurposing of retired industrial facilities that we believe have suitable infrastructure to support large load operations. And lastly, we support the application and development of federal grants. Right now, I think we've got over 730 million awarded, including one of the 7 regional clean hydrogen hubs here in the U.S. So before introducing our panelists and getting into our questions, which is the reason a lot of you are here, I wanted to set some context. The goal of today's discussion is to unpack the opportunities and challenges associated with meeting the large energy demand from the reshoring of manufacturing, AI-driven data centers, and electrification of high GHG emitting sectors like transportations and buildings. And we know, and we'd like to do so from varying perspectives. So this includes the electric and gas utilities, data center developers, as well as technology providers. Because what we like to do is get a holistic understanding of the opportunities and constraints that we're looking to solution in achieving this new demand. So while there is much contributing to this new surge in demand, this includes new AI technology, passing of the CHIPS Act, the IRA funding, increasing offshore labor costs, prospective tariffs, trade tensions, and other geopolitical risks that might be happening right now, data centers seem to be taking center stage, and mostly due to their voracious energy appetite. According to Goldman Sachs, a GPT inquiry uses about 10 times more than a single Google search. And according to a study at Carnegie Mellon, generating an image from AI uses enough energy to charge up one of our smartphones. The U.S. is expected to be one of the fastest growing markets for data centers, and is projected to grow nearly threefold in demand over the next 5 years, albeit that changes from region to region. But that roughly equates to 400 terawatt hour increase in annual energy consumption, which is about 1.5 times the consumption that happens in California where I lived. So there are many opportunities. McKinsey believes that AI could generate roughly between 2.5 to 4.5 trillion in global corporate profits annually, could lead to discovering new scientific breakthroughs that we all need and increases our national security. However, meeting this large demand in a manner that satisfies all parties is fraught with challenges. They include getting a handle on demand forecasts. You've got U.S. forecasts. You've got the advent of DeepSeek's R1 AI model, which is delivered arguably faster and a fraction of the cost. And so this kind of shakes up what kind of forecast we need for chips and towers. There are the challenges of balancing sustainability goals with reliable power supply. A lot of our renewable portfolio is still intermittent in nature. Achieving time to power is also going to be a challenge. I think Goldman Sachs expects that most of the new data centers being built today will be supplied by roughly 60% natural gas. And then overcoming our grid constraints. So how will utilities manage peak demand? And of course, maintaining affordability for those utility customers. We want to make sure that we're not subsidizing or unfairly subsidizing a large industry. There are also supply chain bottlenecks, largely in the transformer equipment space, but also potential shortages in the necessary trade workers like electricians that are needed to develop and power this new demand. So without further ado, let's dig into this topic with our esteemed panelists, and each of which will contribute a piece of this complex puzzle. Let me turn this session over to my colleague and the panel moderator, Wally Merkel. Wally, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, depending on where you are, I guess. And thanks for joining us today. For the next hour and a half, as Sam said, we're going to dive into this challenging increase in energy demand and also explore some of those potential solutions and how we meet that demand, whether it's through investment, innovation, or, of course, collaboration with each other. So I'm Wally Merkel. I'll be moderating the panel today, and I'm a consultant with West Monroe, where we help our clients through those kind of transformational changes to bring on these large loads while maintaining safety, reliability, clean energy goals, and affordability. But part of achieving that mission requires learning about new technologies, policy changes, and ways of thinking. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today with this great panel. We're going to hear directly from these experts, dealing with these questions on a daily basis. And hopefully, together, all of us will get just a little bit closer to the solutions we need. Before I forget, I want to thank my colleagues at West Monroe who helped pull this together. So Estelle Magenet, Margaret Olderies, James Walsh, Sam Bueno, and many others. I also wanted to thank our distinguished panelists for making time to join us today. I know they're very busy and really appreciate the time they've dedicated to be here and help us talk through this today. It's going to be a great discussion. So without further ado, why don't we jump in? I'd like to ask each of our panelists first to kick this off with a quick introduction and opening statement. So Robbie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure, Wally. And just a quick sound check. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. So, yeah, good afternoon. My name is Robbie Wright. I'm Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for Dominion Energy. Just a little bit about our company. Here in Virginia, we serve about 2.8 million customers. We are a vertically integrated utility. And then Strategic Partnerships, my organization, we're responsible for managing key customer relationships. And so we support our largest customers on a range of topics. Think rates, reliability, new service connections, electrification, really anything, any of their needs, we try to be the single point of contact for them. Also within strategic partnerships, we have a standalone data center practice that has similar responsibilities. And then they also handle forecasting, economic development, and other budget type management activities for those for the data center segment here in Virginia. You know, if I think about the discussion today, maybe a couple of key points to set the stage from my perspective. I think as many know, Virginia hosts the largest data center market in the world. Our Northern Virginia area is the epicenter of that. Here in Virginia, we have about 3.5 gigawatts of data center load currently being served by Dominion. And that's part of an overall system peak demand of about 23 gigawatts. And so that 23 gigawatts, I think, is important because if you think about how we've grown as a utility, it's taken us more than 100 years to grow to that 23 gigawatt peak demand across our system. And with current forecasts, with data centers being a primary driver, we're expected to double that peak load in the next 15 years. So all that to say, I think we're talking about unprecedented times here in the electric industry, as well as the technology industry. And then factor in what we've seen for the past few years, a shift to clean energy sources. So the adoption of wind and solar, things that are changing how the grid operates. And so we've got this significant growth ahead of us, and we've got this shift to these distributed resources that'll present a lot of challenges, and a lot of that will be the topics of conversation today. But I would also say they will provide opportunities. And so that'll be opportunities to leverage new technologies, to leverage innovation, to transform how we build and operate the grid and how we use those resources. And I think that will be important for our discussion today. We'll talk a lot about challenges, but also seeing them as opportunities. And I think you'll see the themes of technology and innovation as kind of a common thread through a lot of the discussion. So that's a little perspective from me, and looking forward to our discussion today.
Thanks so much, Robbie. And Mina, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear a little from you.
Great. First, thank you so much, Wally and the West Monroe team. I'm so glad to be a part of this conversation today. I'm Mina Byers. I'm Vice President of Business and Community Development for Nicor Gas. Nicor Gas is Illinois' and Southern Company's largest natural gas distribution company. We serve about 2.3 million customers across Northern Illinois. We build and maintain 34,000 miles of pipe that's interconnected to about 8 interstate pipelines. We also own and operate 8 underground storage facilities, which I'll talk a little bit about later today. My perspective today on this demand for data centers is that really between data centers and the industrial growth that we're seeing from reshoring that you mentioned, it's going to take every type of energy available to meet this moment. And at Southern Company, as a part of Southern Company, we have gas and electric utilities in multiple states. We're well positioned and we stand ready to meet all those demands. But today I'm really bringing the perspective of the incredible strategic advantage that natural gas plays, particularly in Northern Illinois where we operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. Todd, it'd be great to hear an introduction from you. All right.
It'd probably be helpful to unmute, wouldn't it? Yeah. First of all, I want to thank West Monroe for including me in this dialogue and this conversation. I'm Todd House. I'm with CyrusOne. I'm the Senior Director of Global External Affairs, and my responsibility is public policy, community engagement, strategic stakeholder relationship. Just as a little reference point of who CyrusOne is, we are a global data center developer and operator with more than 50 performance mission critical data centers around the globe. Our facilities are located in North America, Western Europe, and also in the future in Japan. And we operate in tier one markets, which would be, as Robert indicated, Northern Virginia, DFW market in Texas, as well as San Antonio, the Phoenix area, Chicago, London, Frankfurt, Dublin, Amsterdam, Paris, and multitude of other ones in both North America and in Europe, including in Madrid and Milan, we're developing. And interestingly, in Japan, we are partnering with a utility, KEPCO, as a joint venture for our first entry in the Osaka market. So we are a global developer, and for us, our business model is we develop the data centers and we lease out the space to others who would provide the data and the servers in our facilities. So that's what we do. The one thing I want to level set is, how did we get here with all this growth? And what I'd like to kind of remind people is what we are providing is services that are referencing from our society's insatiable appetite for digitization of our everyday lives. I mean, I think everyone on this, in fact, right now, as we are participating, we're operating through a data center. And every time we touch anything that touches our phone, we're using data center capacity. So kind of just want to level set that we are just referencing what society is demanding. And interestingly, in 2010, 79% of all data center computing was done locally. If you remember in the offices, you had the server room and somebody had to maintain it there. By 2018, 89% of all compute took place in a data center. So it was this massive migration to the cloud. And for data centers, we are the optimum, most efficient place to do compute. Interestingly, in 2020, Lawrence Berkeley Lab did a study and found that while compute jumped 550% between that period of 2010 and 2018, the energy consumption increased not 6%. So, I mean, granted, we are growing a lot, but we are growing efficiently. And then kind of the final thing I want to leave with people is, yes, we are first mover in this need for new energy and new infrastructure. But as we move forward and our load enables and allows my partners in the utilities and independent people to make investments in that infrastructure is going to benefit multiple elements of our society as we do electrify everything that we want to do. Potentially houses become electrified, the EVs, all of that stuff is going to require a more robust energy ecosystem, and data centers are a perfect load to help build that out in the future. It's just going to require a lot of partnership, dialogue, and figuring out what's the best pathway forward to achieve that. So I look forward to the future conversation.
Thank you, Todd. And not last but not least, Mr. Carney.
Thanks, Wally. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I do want to thank West Monroe for hosting me and all of the panelists here. I think this is a very pertinent and important time to be having these discussions. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today. My name is Mike Carney, and I'm a solution architect on the Clean Power Solutions team at Baker Hughes. If you've never heard of Baker Hughes before, we're an energy technology company. It's really broken up into two segments. One is our oil field services and equipment side, and the other is the industrial and energy technology, which is the side that I sit on, and then particularly our Clean Power Solutions group. And really what our Clean Technology, Clean Power Solutions group looks at is we look at solutions for hydrogen, carbon capture, storage and utilization, emissions abatement, and clean power value chains. Some of the products that we offer are 100% hydrogen-ready gas turbines, geothermal. We look at solutions for grid stability and microgrids, all of which play a very pertinent role when we're looking at technology solutions and options for data centers, and also to help drive the decarbonization that we're all looking and that everyone is demanding of us. And really what my role as a solution architect is to listen to these customers, data centers included, and help design solutions to them to achieve cleaner, more resilient, and cheaper power, kind of leveraging our equipment, but also really looking at partnerships and how we can achieve this through a group of people. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. And that's really what the perspective I'm bringing from today. I have the technology side and how we can help build and design these, but really I want to elaborate how partnerships really enable these solutions to this energy demand, specifically to data centers. And it's really going to entail an all hands on deck approach. So what that means is we have to consider utility upgrades, a mixture of behind the meter assets. And we know that really what's important to data centers is they want power now and then a pathway to decarbonization into the future. And so that's really a lot of these items will spin out into the conversation later, I hope. But looking forward to the conversation and thinking. I hand it back over to you, Wally.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I'm really excited to have this panel here. We've had a chance to talk a little bit over the past couple months, and there's a lot to dive into and digest here. So this is going to be a great discussion. So let's get into it. Let's talk through our first question here. So Mina, I'm going to ask if you can kick us off with this first one, and then please the other panelists jump in as appropriate. So question one is really the big one. It's about this increasing demand that we're talking about. So, we heard a lot of stats here. I've got a few more. So, through a study of EIA data, demand for electricity in the U.S. is projected to increase anywhere between 7 to 26% between the period of 2023 to 2028. That's a 5-year period, mostly due to large loads like data centers and industrial onshoring. That is a far larger increase than the 5% energy demand growth we saw from 2005 through 2023, which was a much longer time span of 18 years. So Todd, I think you mentioned about how efficiency played a part, right? We did get more efficient while we were bringing more on the grid, but we're seeing that those efficiencies are now kind of at their limit. And as we expand with new technologies, we're expecting quite a boom at this point in time, and it's coming quickly. So the question here I've got is, given the stats that we're seeing and the threat that potentially our capabilities to meet energy demand within the next few years are going to be significantly challenged, Mia, you as one of our utility panelists, how do you think about meeting that demand? How do you meet that challenge and rise to the occasion? And I'd love for the data center panelists to jump in a little later and let us know, how do you think about meeting a demand for a more scarce resource than we used to have?
Yeah, thanks, Wally. And you mentioned that Goldman Sachs stat earlier too that talked about, the double demand by 2030 and 60% of that potentially being met by natural gas. And it's unbelievable because, again, we're talking about 5-year periods that go so rapidly. So, even for us at Nicor Gas, we didn't see a whole lot with data centers. Historically, even for resilience plays, diesel was sort of the preferred backup source. And so when a data center would come into town, we'd have, maybe one or two that were looking for natural gas for resilience. But other than that, we wouldn't really be involved with a lot of data center projects. And really, they started heating up in 2023. So it was very recently that we really started seeing an interest in using natural gas for prime power. And very quickly, within 1 year, that project pipeline went from, one project looking at backup resilience to 500 megawatts of natural gas for prime power for mid-sized data centers. So in Illinois, we're really able to show that in some cases, cogen options with natural gas, they can be faster to market. They can be lower cost operationally. They can even be lower emissions in some cases. And with that project pipeline and all of these large loads that we're looking at, as well as you mentioned industrial for reshoring, we're seeing a lot of new large loads for that as well. We're thinking about the demand in a few ways. First, it's the economic development opportunity for the region. If a natural gas solution is what's going to land the project, we should be collectively promoting the strategic advantages of locating data centers in our region and serving them with natural gas. Even if it is, we talk about sometimes like a bridge solution or a short-term solution, these are sort of collective efforts where let's get the economic development win for the state. Next, we're also thinking about how we protect our system and our existing customers. We continue to experience very steady growth on our gas system, adding about 12,000 meters a year. And then when you add these large load projects, that really, when you look at our growth in throughput, that we're projecting to double that over the next 5 years. So we're working with our regulators to make sure we have the right rate structures and that we're putting those protections in place. And then finally, thinking about how to meet that demand and meet the moment, we're thinking about the incredible opportunity this brings to look at innovative, clean technologies. So we'll talk about those in a little bit, I know.
Yeah. No, Mina, I'm happy to jump in. And, just as a reference point for a company like ours, we're responding to the demand signals from our customers, both from a geographic, their desires to be in certain locations, but also their load profile. And, we're talking about the load profiles are getting larger and larger. And we're sort of going through a paradigm shift of how we actually approach this. Whereas before it was, we'd look for land and then we'd determine if there's power availability. We're starting to actually flip that on its head. And we're actually looking where power availability is there. And if it's a geographic match for the customer signal, those are how we're starting to look at locations. But also, what we're trying to do is our preference is utility power, but recognizing there are times where that is not going to be viable in the time frame that we need to go to market with our customers. And as Mina was saying, we are looking at new innovative models where we are exploring how do we use bridging technologies with our backup gen sets as we build the system, because I don't know if people are familiar, but we have a 5 nines requirement for virtually all of our customer engagements, meaning 99.999% reliability. And for us to do that, we do have backup diesel gens that mirror the exact load that we are going to need to be required for our customers. And those are assets that, quite frankly, are used in an emergency situation. So how do we look at new models, as Mina was indicating, where maybe those move to a natural gas fuel, and then that becomes a potentially a distributed resource that obviously we want first signal, but how do we work on using that as a potential now with the natural gas fuel set, a little more consistent, more reliable. And does that open up new models? Does it allow us to bridge maybe some loads until the utility does come there with full load energization? So it's really right now a learning lab that's going on in the data center space of how do we meet this demand as quick as possible, and what are the new technologies and new sort of structures to do that beyond just buying a piece of land and then hoping that utility can meet the demand signal at the time that we are required with our customers. So it's a fascinating period of time right now in this space.
Yeah, and the follow up to kind of what Todd said is even if those gen sets become natural gas and to replace the diesel, that's scope 1 emission reduction right there. You're transferring from diesel, which is a little more carbon intense than natural gas, and so it's helping that decarb story as well when you're just starting from that piece alone. And then you look into kind of when we approach it with our customers, as we call it, the art of the possible, which we start with a clean slate and then we will start listening to them, understand what their decarb goals are, understand what their cost is, because you can't just go full renewables. You won't have the resiliency that Todd said that you guys need. You won't have the cost structures in place to perhaps, if you were to go full renewables too. And so we kind of play with it on a wide range of different equipments and bring in different partnerships, whether that's battery, whether that's hydrogen, whether that's energy, gas turbines, gas engines, you name it. Be kind of when I work with these customers, that's kind of what I'm hearing as well. And you can then take it and design them a solution that meets all their needs and gets them to all their goals.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add is the other flavor of how we're looking at the market is looking at co-location with existing generation assets that, quite frankly, are being underused. And with AI, where the compute doesn't necessarily need to be in hyper-connected AZ zones where basically a lot of our customers have a desire to be because of connectivity, you can be potentially more remote out there because the compute's happening in the center and then transmitting. It is opening up new, potentially more rural areas that have actually a strong economic development flavor to them as well. And that's where policymakers are wanting to see this data center development migrate to. That's another flavor for how we are meeting basically the moment and trying to find energy to power data centers. And that's another flavor that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, and I may pile on just a little bit from the utility perspective. And I think you've heard it a couple of times already, just the size of the growth, the demand growth we're talking about. There's not a silver bullet or a single solution that's going to allow us to meet that need. It really is all of the above. And so that's your mature technologies, that's your clean energy technologies, it's your tried and true technologies, solar, wind, natural gas. And then it's also, if you look further out, it's some of the newer technologies that are developing. Small modular reactors is one that gets a lot of attention, but really is just more of all of those from a resource perspective. And then look at it a little bit differently from a utility perspective. One of the important things, we need to make sure that we're getting full value out of our existing assets. So we're really utilizing them to the fullest extent possible. And so that might be using grid technologies or intelligent devices that increase your awareness on the grid, dynamic line ratings, or new conductor technologies that increase the capacity. Is just looking at any way that technology can allow us to maximize what's already out there or what we're going to be installing. Another example, using existing corridors. We know that greenfield construction of these large infrastructure projects, when you get into bulk system and transmission grid additions and expansions, permitting and a lot of the regulatory processes can really drag out your timeline for those projects. And so just ensuring, if we've got corridors, if we've got rights of way, is it operating those? Is it adding to those as maybe a way to meet our timeline needs and ensure we're unlocking incremental capacity to the fullest extent that we can?
Oh, wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I was taking a ton of notes. And I think there's some good follow-ups that we're going to get into here. Where I think it makes sense to kind of take this is maybe dive into our next question, because we're already thinking about what are the solutions, what's the innovations, what are the changes we need to contemplate to kind of address this challenge. You're hearing that we've got a preference for utility power from data center folks, but they're looking at alternatives. And some of those alternatives that we're seeing in the news are, for example, Constellation and Constellation and Microsoft signing a deal to reopen the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in order to supply the power needs for a co-located data center, right? 100% of the sales going right there on site to a data center. Another one we've heard about is Amazon partnering with Dominion. So Robbie, this is up your creek, to explore small modular reactors in Virginia. And a third is American Electric Power planning to purchase up to 1 gigawatts of fuel cells from Bloom Energy. I think even just within the past couple days, I saw a note that Chevron announced some interest in really focusing on natural gas generation. So Mina, I see your head shaking. You must have been excited and heard the news about that one. So I think the question here that we're all kind of looking at is, it's a big challenge, and the time to achieve it is significantly quicker than the traditional methods of building infrastructure utilities have been in the past, right? Robbie, you mentioned, the ability to build transmission corridors takes quite a while when you think about permitting. So the question I've got for this team is do we need to get innovative? It sounds like you're suggesting we need to get a little more innovative and think about different approaches to this. Would love to hear what the team thinks about that question and how do we meet that faster pace of meeting the demand that we see. Mike, it'd be great to hear your perspective as a clean energy architect across the industry first.
Yeah, no, and you made a lot of great points there, Wally. And some of the technology you mentioned are available now and today. Others are definitely more into the future. But to what we had heard from Todd is that they need power now, and and that will obviously continue to move into the future. And so, how do we meet those two things? And one thing we touched on already was this bridge to backup concept. So I won't go in to repeat that, but I think that definitely holds true here. With the scope 1 reduction emissions, you can even potentially remove the need for having diesels on site. So that's a huge capital expenditure savings that the data center won't have to bear. That can then contribute towards the natural gas. But then there's also other solutions for the immediate future, is powered, like the concept of power generation on wheels, which is really where you have a trailer mounted gas generator that you're able to wheel on in, really quick installation time, and start generating power very quickly. And so that then once the utility power becomes available, once these other solutions, cleaner solutions become available, you can just wheel that right away. And then you can either bring it to a different site waiting for the utility connection, or you could even keep them there much longer term. And so you have to think about different concepts that go along with that, but that's definitely one other option in the shorter term, because to help meet that power now. But then when you think about it into the future, you mentioned fuel cells, which space constraints sometimes, but definitely a viable option. No combustion there. SMRs, even sometimes we're seeing geothermal. And so you see in the news around different geothermal companies and how data centers are exploring geothermal, because that is also a prime dispatchable power that is clean energy. And so that helps meet that transition to decarbonization into the future.
Yeah.
And Mike, before we move on there, I want to make sure I just understand that concept of a bridge to power. The thought, can you explain that just a little bit more? Is the idea is that using some of your on-site infrastructure, you can offset your needs, or how do you think about that?
So it can be done a couple different ways, especially when you're having it more dispatchable, I would say. So bridge to power is what we kind of described a little earlier, where you have you don't have utility connection maybe for 3, 5, whatever years in, and you can bring in this gas generation to help act as a prime power. And then afterwards, that would then replace the diesel generators once the utility becomes available, to help meet that need that data centers are still looking for the utility long term, and then they can use these assets. But then when you size these, it was alluded to a little bit earlier that you can even potentially trade spare capacity, because they're going to these power generation units are going to be sized for the worst case day, and which typically is in hotter weather. So in the winter months, or if the grid calls on you to use to need it, you can partner with the utility then and help support the utility in needs that ways for on-site generation might not have been as viable for before.
I want to go back to the conversation that was about co-location in some of the models that are out there. The policy stress that we're seeing in some of these announcements is the fear that power is being taken exclusively off the grid, and how does the grid get balanced? Where I think some cooperative models that I think might ease the co-location model is, yes, co-locating, but having the data center operator acknowledge and have the resources on site that they're willing to and able to generate during times of broader grid stress, that like an RTO would send a signal that there is power put back on the grid and a data center operator during those times would self-generate. So it sort of releases some of that stress that is out there now, that those megawatts are permanently being taken off the system and they're being exclusively used. So these are some of the models that might move and make co-location more in a policy regulatory mentality more hospitable and maybe more viable down the road. So, I mean, those are things that we're looking at as well at Cyrus One.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So, I mean, I think this is why what Todd was mentioning earlier about, you know, trying to go where the power is versus just picking the side of land first. We're definitely starting to see that too. I mean, the good news for a market like ours with the Chicago hub for natural gas, it's such a liquid market, and there's so much interconnection nationwide that it doesn't take years to run a pipe. It takes months, right? And I think where we're starting to see some of the innovation then is understanding that we are a great speed to market solution in markets like that, and that the capacity is there and the ability to deliver it is there. It's really the generation assets that we're starting to see some of the innovation in. You know, if we're hearing from customers that it's maybe a long lead time to order the turbines that they were looking for, we are starting to see, for example, you mentioned hydrogen fuel cells. You know, that Chevron announcement talked about turbines that have integrated opportunities to integrate carbon capture in the future. And so we're hoping, you know, to see some of that. So, and we're also seeing companies really start to package long-term solutions together where, you know, okay, this is your solution to get speed to market now, and this is how we're going to transition you into a resilient, you know, your gas service into a resilience model in the future.
Thank you, Mina and Mike. And I think we started to tease out a question that's been asked here by our audience. But I'm curious, Todd or Mike, if there's a little more context you'd like to add. The question is regarding, is there an ability to modulate or to create more efficiencies within the data centers in order to reduce the amount of load that they're asking for from the grid?
Yeah, I mean, it's in our economic interest to be the most efficient possible, and we are constantly on our what we control, which is the operating environment outside of the servers, to be extraordinarily efficient. It's just economically the right, both for the environment and our customers. So there's constant move on that. And then there is on the servers, which is not our responsibility, there's a constant innovation for more efficient chipsets and servers. But the reality is there's still that insatiable appetite for growth. So yes, we will be more efficient, but there's still fundamental data growth. So it's sort of bending that curve, if that makes sense, on the efficiency conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. And before we leave this question of innovation, Robbie, I'm curious, you know, in Virginia, it's got to be top of mind. How are you thinking about innovation and new solutions to this challenge?
Yeah, you know, a lot of this discussion, I think, is kind of speed to market, the ability to get the electrons flowing, whatever the source. And we kind of call it the speed of the need. The volume of requests is certainly a big factor, but it's also the size of the requests. And just for us, we've been connecting data centers for more than 20 years, and we've seen the size of those services grow, or the size of those requests grow from, you know, single megawatts and maybe tens of megawatts, where you would have a distribution solution, a feeder extension, or maybe some upgrades at a substation, but mostly distribution solution, to now a lot of the requests are in the hundreds of megawatts. And so while we are continuing at a steady pace of connecting meters and connecting new services, the capacity is significantly higher than it's ever been. And at the same time, the type of solution has gotten much more complex. We've now moved to solutions that involve new substations, transmission upgrades, and upline upgrades to the bulk system. So that puts a lot more additional pressure or headwinds on the ability to deliver what the customer is looking for. And a little touch on the small modular reactors, and the intent there is we believe that's a key piece of success in the long term, but it's going to take a kind of a collaborative approach. And so we've announced a partnership with Amazon, and we're hoping we can find other stakeholders that will come into this discussion. And the ultimate goal is that we can advance these new technologies, de-risk the journey, and expedite these new technologies so that they can be a resource, long term. So that's a really important part of the long term solution. But I think it gets back to a lot of what others have talked about. What are the interim solutions that we need between now and then? And so the on-site bridging to backup, and the maximizing your capacity of your existing grid, and then some of your more traditional generation resources are all going to be an important part of the solutions as we go along.
The one thing that I think sometimes gets lost in the shuffle is, yes, our load is growing, but also our load is the perfect kind of load that is incentivized and allowing innovation, where our utility partners have confidence because our load is really perfect. It's perfect load factor, not just for our utility partners, but independent power producers and innovation in solar and wind and third-party developers, that our load is enabling and incentivizing investment in new energy infrastructure and new energy types of solutions that in other types of industries, maybe it doesn't have that same power and confidence to make investments that the data center industry is bearing on our overall industry. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle.
And if possible, maybe one more different way of thinking of innovation, maybe not just on technology alone, but on partnerships and business models, and how utilities can work together with technology providers and work together with data centers operators, and how, because these data centers now that are looking at investing in on-site power generation, they don't have a lot of experience owning and operating power plants. And so how does that all work, and how does everyone work together? Is it an energy as a service business model, and that enables different owner operators? And so we have to be thinking about that as to not just technology innovation, but thinking differently and outside the box on how we can transact these and de-risk, and making sure that we're delivering outcomes to our customers.
That's interesting. And so as we think about cooperation, we talk about sharing data and having links between, the loads and the operators of the grid. So are there provisions to allow those sorts of links, and for the potential to receive signals and understand when's a good time for load and when's not? Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, from a utility perspective, I think there's quite a bit of uncharted territory. We historically have resources, firm dispatchable resources, and we make decisions and control those resources. And to some extent, that control those are our resources, or we're signaling to a third party operator. So to bring just hypothetically, if it's a customer owned resource, to bring that into that kind of those activities, there's an element of unknown there that we really need to work out. I spoke earlier about how the size of these sites and these loads is growing. So the idea that you have hundreds of megawatts of load that has the potential to be able to respond from a signal, there's the potential there for a lot of value to the grid in terms of a demand response or whatever use you might have for it. And then if there are generating sources, with that customer, then again, just more opportunities for grid services. And so I think the key is for the utility is working through the protocols, the tools, the information exchange that's necessary to do that reliably, securely, and at a level of confidence that we know we are maintaining the the safety and the security, reliability of the bulk system.
I mean, this is a space that obviously a lot more work needs to be done in sort of demand response programs that are utility driven or otherwise. And for a data center operator, and I won't speak necessarily for Cyrus, but we have those same concerns about our need to be responsive to our customers' operational requirements. And when you're developing a demand response program, how do you balance all those equities in the space of using, generating assets that potentially we have, does not interrupt our ability to meet our customer demands, and how are those signals put out there, and how are they economically viable for all parties? I just think this is a space that needs more conversation, more deliberation, but having utilities obviously take a harder look at that. I think because I think the policymakers are looking at utilities and looking at demand response, and they just have this broad concept of demand response, but it's a lot more complicated than just saying demand response.
Well, and I'll also just add that I think this is where efficiency of the data centers is going to play a very interesting role, because as there's advancement in efficiency and the ability to build efficiency for these centers that are built for their full loads, it's going to free up capacity and create new opportunities for those grid servicing as well, almost like incrementally or over time as those efficiency improvements come. So I think it's another interesting way to think about, how do we move with that technology?
Oh, this is exciting. There's so many different ways these solutions could go. It's almost mind-boggling to try and keep track of them all. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate those answers. I think let's move on here to another topic. These solutions are all going to require significant investment. We're estimating. I saw an estimate that it could be almost $2 trillion worldwide to meet the data center demand. So as we move towards meeting that growing demand, as well as balancing the other goals we have, like clean energy requirements and goals, how do we think about affordability and equitable cost sharing? How do we make sure this is done in a responsible manner?
Well, I'll take the first cut, and the good thing is there already are processes in place to balance those equities, and those are predominantly in the regulatory environment and space that have a history of ensuring not cross-subsidization, all the basic bond right principles of non-discrimination, limit cross-subsidization, transparency, all the things that, quite frankly, regulators do day in and day out and have the expertise to do that. From a data center perspective, we clearly believe we need to pay our fair share. Where we do have concern is that this is adjudicated in a legislative environment that, quite frankly, doesn't have the expertise necessarily to determine those type of considerations. And we believe there is processes in place, and it is the regulatory regimes that I think everybody on this panel are familiar with, and those are the appropriate places to balance those equities out.
Yeah, I can just add from a utility perspective, agree completely. I mean, I think if anything, there's legislative opportunities to unlock opportunity or remove barriers to be able to improve speed of site selection or certificating new areas or, different opportunities like that. But, utility regulation is designed for the past and it's forward looking. So it's just not really built to move with the agility and the speed that we're seeing these changes for demands on the system. And so even going through those regulatory structures, largely, as we talk to our, we're all scrambling to sort of figure out what are the regulatory constructs we need to get in place? What do we need to get in front of our regulators with? I also think there's real opportunity to better understand, to team up with the Todds of the world and the Michaels of the world to better understand the societal benefits and sort of the economic development benefits that the data centers bring in terms of follow-on development and manufacturing that follows and all those things, because there could be benefits, large customer benefits, where portions of this, you do see go into rate base because they provide larger benefits. But I think we just don't know how to quantify those at this point.
Yeah, I would say, as Todd and Nina said, the traditional regulated utility construct, I think, has proven to be effective for a long time. And so it's not that we need to throw it out and invent something new or different, but maybe look at how what's changing with these loads, or what's changing with growth, and whether it's the type of load characteristics of the load, or if it's the extent to which it's driving upgrades, up the system to ensure that it continues to accomplish what it's intended to accomplish. And I also think that utilities have other tools. If you think about the risk of stranded costs as an example, utilities have contracting strategies. And so whether it's, covering commitments for the customer to cover costs related to the engineering should the project not move forward, or long lead equipment should the project not move forward, or whether it's, minimum demand payments through the service agreement, or the duration of the service agreement. So I think there's a lot of other tools that need to continue to be in the discussion as ways to ensure that we continue to achieve the appropriate cost allocation.
Yeah. I mean, the only other point is, and the stress point we have is, utilities are seeing these very large load projections, and there needs to be better forecasting that is reflective of, what the industry sees and what utilities sees. So we have an accurate reflection for utilities to actually build out their appropriate infrastructure and generation assets if you're a fully integrated utility. I mean, one perspective I think that we would like to see is, not every developer is the same, and oftentimes, and we kind of joke in the industry, there's the farmer who has 500 acres and a glimmer in his eye that he's going to sell it to a data center, and he found a developer to basically approach a utility, and some communication was that this is viable, and they have a letter that's sort of a pre-SA letter. I mean, that ability to go from where they are to actually a meter running is not always going to be materializing. So having potentially utilities have higher barriers to entry to have that ESA letter or other infrastructure needs, we believe actually would help the market to make sure that the conversation between data centers and utilities, the conversations are for people that actually have the ability to perform, and at the end of the day, a meter is going to run. And I think it might help with having a better rationalization of where the load forecasting is. And I can't say is it going to go up or down, but I think having those type of higher barriers are good things to rationalize the planning a little more than we currently have.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm gonna try and see if we can work in another audience question here that's maybe somewhat related. I know that some of our regulators are looking at microgrids, and I know some of our clients are in areas where they're being piloted. Is there the potential for microgrids to be built to help serve these data centers, and does that change the regulatory basis and business model around how those assets are owned and managed?
I mean, I always view microgrids. It's an eye of the beholder. What is a microgrid? I think the conversations we've had of distributed assets and dispatchable and demand response, I guess you could quantify those as a microgrid potentially. So I'm not exactly sure where you would expand beyond that, or between the conversations we already have and of how the question is framed.
Yeah, it's a tough one, I know, and Todd, I think you hit the nail on the head. Is what is a microgrid and how does it work? And there's lots of different ways to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how that moves as both the issues evolve together in parallel, and they might cross paths.
And I'll just real quick on from the technology perspective, Wally, there, because when you see, I've always heard the saying, when you've seen one microgrid, you've seen one microgrid, and they're really all different, and to many different people, it means a lot of different things. And so if as a industry, if we start becoming better at really defining what that is, we can help addressing needs a lot better, because two people can say microgrid and go and diverge very, very quickly into what they're trying to solve for. And so just kind of as we think about that, but you see data, if you define a microgrid as a distribution level of assets that can operate in an island and synchronize to the grid, we've seen data center operators really look at a partial utility connection for capacity and bring in different resources to help supplement that. And so if you define that as, I think that people are looking at them already.
Thanks, Mike. So I want to keep the discussion focused on kind of the economics here. So we've talked about regulatory frameworks, and sounds like the general consensus is we'd like to stick within the existing frameworks, but see them evolve to meet the challenges and solutions we're talking about. We talked about benefits though, right? And that's always a big piece of these frameworks is what is the benefit of making these investments. So, Todd, would be great to hear your perspective as well on what this level of investment represents economically to the communities, the nations, and globally, and why should we be investing in these?
Yeah. And this is an area that our industry needs to do a better job of communicating the economic value that we bring to the markets that we operate in. And I'm just going to throw out and provide some statistics, some color commentary on this with some meat in the bones. Is in 2023, PwC did a study that the data center industry, that we contribute basically have 468,000 direct jobs in the industry, and this is in the United States. We have basically, when you actually multiply it out of, for every single job of a data center, direct data center creates about 6 other jobs. We have $294 billion in total labor income in 2021. And so we actually contribute more than I think people recognize. And interestingly, the space where we operate are the type of jobs that I think our society and economic development professionals want to see, that mid-skill operator who, quite frankly, maybe didn't need to have a college degree. In fact, JLARC, which is basically the state of Virginia's government, the GAO, just did a study on data centers. I encourage anybody to do a deep dive on it, but they did do a segment on what is the economic impact. Interestingly, on average, data center employees and contractors earn about $100,000 a year. A lot of them are for electricians and other journeyman type careers. And they also indicated that basically in Virginia, which is data center capital of the world, that we provide about 74,000 jobs a year and $5.5 billion in labor income and $9.1 billion overall GDP in Virginia. Interestingly, in a high concentration area, now Loudoun County, granted that's data center capital of the world, but the data center property tax payments that we in aggregate as an industry provide to Loudoun County covers their entire budget exclusive of schools. So it's quite a large amount of revenue that we do bring to the communities we operate in from a property tax perspective. So, there's a lot out there that we do bring to the table, but our FTEs that I think legislators and policymakers like to hone in on, it's 10 to 20 per data center, but that doesn't count for all the ecosystem that happens around one of our facilities or any facility. There's always an HVAC contractor that's constantly going in and out of the facility, helping bring in those servers, with electricians. Basically, skilled trades are constantly hovering around a facility beyond the time that a construction of a data center happens, which is a beehive of activity where you will have potentially 1,500 people working on building that data center campus. And you can kind of imagine, think about the person who has that food truck business, and they're the ones that on every day go out and they pull up, and their entire livelihood is based on servicing those construction workers that are coming out and doing business with them. Those are the type of stories that we as a data center industry probably need to do a better job of communicating, and the contractors that we use. So it's a huge industry, massive growth. But I think I would fully acknowledge that we just don't do the same job, the best job we should on communicating our value proposition. I don't know if anybody else, hopefully, will chime in on the value we bring.
Well, I jotted all of that down because those are amazing stats to share. And it just made me think about the incredible opportunities for partnerships because, as utilities, we're already facilitating a lot of these partnerships around workforce development and jobs. And I think about like community college networks and other nonprofits and other sorts of partnerships that we can facilitate on the workforce and community development fronts, where we don't see, we haven't done that yet with data centers. So I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, and wearing my old utility hat, the one other sort of addition is just the value of more robust additional energy infrastructure begets economic development. I mean, energy is an integral part to fundamental economic development. And as our load is empowering our gas utilities and our electric utilities to invest in infrastructure in new geographic areas, that only benefits the fundamental economic development picture and where we operate.
I'll tie in a little bit too, kind of. So you're hearing reports out now on how manufacturing capacity on transformers as well as power generation equipment is the capacity, the lead times are growing. And so that will also spur investment into increasing manufacturing capability, which therefore also will create new jobs and where these equipment is manufactured. So that's one lens to look through it as well. But kind of one other benefit that maybe isn't as prevalent in the US, but we see more in Europe is district heating and the potential to leverage waste heat in which provides then heating to communities and helps reduce costs there. And so it's definitely kind of not one that I feel is highlighted well enough. It's still in the infancy for the most part, I would say, but that's definitely another potential to help impact positively communities near where data centers operate.
I mean, to Michael's point, we are doing a partnership in Frankfurt with heat reuse from our facility there. So those are models that clearly Europe is far more advanced than in the United States, but those are opportunities for additional use.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think a question that comes out of this conversation, though, very quickly comes towards if we're making this level of investment, is there an opportunity to make progress on the other goals that we have nationally and internationally? So, for awareness, there's 24 states out there in the U.S. that have 100% clean energy goals, and many other states that have goals at less than 100%, but they're working toward significant clean energy generation within their state. So as we meet the demand for more and more energy, how do you balance those goals while making these significant investments in infrastructure and new generation? So maybe if Robbie, it'd be great to hear your perspective on that first.
Yes, I can kick it off, and we've talked a lot about just the size of the growth and unprecedented growth that we are projecting and that we're seeing. The idea that there's also clean energy goals and a clean energy transition that's occurring. The bottom line is the demand we're seeing creates significant challenges to those clean energy goals and transitions. And so where you have states that have goals in place, I expect, like Virginia, and we do have goals in place, I expect that many locations see challenges to meeting those clean energy goals as we also try to meet demand. And I'll go back to some of the earlier comments. It really, there's not a single solution here that's going to get us there. It's going to take more of everything, all generating sources. Our latest integrated resource plan, as an example, shows an increase in all types of resource needs over the horizon of that long-term resource plan. But still 80% of the resources are designated as clean energy. So that's a lower percentage than our previous integrated resource plan from a few years earlier, and just demonstrates that the demand is increasing, the speed of the demand is increasing. And so some of the solutions that are becoming more prevalent in the interim, particularly, are those natural gas kind of traditional solutions. That all just translates to it's going to be very challenging to continue to make the journey for the clean energy transition. But we've got work in progress on all fronts. We're in the middle of what will be the largest offshore wind project in the country when it goes into service next year. It's 2.6 gigawatts. We continue to add utility scale solar to our portfolio. We touched on the work we're doing for small modular reactors, trying to advance that. And then we have natural gas, that firm dispatchable generation. We've got projects proposed in front of our regulators for additional natural gas. And so, that's that whole portfolio. It's going to take all of that. And then we touched a little bit the idea of do these new types of loads and the size of the loads, do those provide new opportunities for maybe different ways to manage load or demand response programs that maybe can become part of the discussion as we go forward.
Yeah, and I don't want to dismiss the challenges of the need for and the challenges of developing clean energy, but clearly for CyrusOne, our customers are demanding clean energy, and we have strong commitments for clean energy. We have a commitment for climate neutral data energy by 2030. But I guess the macro view is our demand signal is probably the best demand signal to push and have utilities and independent power providers and energy developers to actually invest in clean energy because our demand signal is requiring it. And I think that is an important element of the conversation. That our signal is the one that is driving a lot of that push for clean energy.
Todd, I think you hit the nail on the head there. A lot of this demand is driving the innovation, and because it has to. And so I think about and look at technologies. Even if you're leveraging gas generation, you have carbon capture that you can put on the back end of it. EGR is one example of that for turbines. And so how can we start thinking creatively, but also having to de-risk it? A lot of this is new technologies and data centers, typically because of their reliability, resiliency, from what I've seen, and Todd, you can probably validate or invalidate it, but really more risk adverse. They need to ensure that they can deliver power to their customers. And so,
absolutely. I mean, I said 5 nines. We're very serious about our 5 nines of operation, and I joke we're not going to deploy a Rube Goldberg contraption that somebody thinks is going to work, and they maybe have one installation that's and they believe that can scale. Absolutely. We are fundamentally risk averse, but we're risk averse because we have to be based on our client profile. I mean, I don't think anybody wants their banking records to go down or their medical records not to transmit or 911 dispatch, which can be housed in a data center, to go down because the technology was not 100% thought through. And there's a lot of innovation out there and a lot of pitching of concepts, but and I think our utility partners are in the same boat. We think in long term, making sure it works before you move forward. So,
100%.
That was a good point, Michael. Very good.
Yeah, and just to kind of tie it back all together is really finding different risk models and thinking about that innovatively and how we can share risk, de-risk projects, and because you think about geothermal, when we're involved in different geothermal projects, yes, it's a great dispatchable power, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the beginning of a project. But then as you confirm the resource, the risk becomes lower and lower, and that's where the investment requirement goes up. And so how do you look at those financial models to help not just go on a spending spree, but also, like I said, meet the resiliency, reliability, and that can also help drive different ways to the clean power.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think a lot of our stakeholders from a utility perspective, they're thinking about this as, the balance between demand and clean energy. And those are the two things that hang in the balance. And as system operators, we're thinking about it as like optimization of complex, interconnected and interrelated systems. And it's an optimization of demand and clean energy, but it's also optimizing that with cost and with system resilience and all these different things. And I think, it is so exciting about all of the technology opportunities. So I feel like if we can kind of shift to understand this is a long game and sort of shift our thinking to understand right now we're optimizing all those resources, but we're still playing this long game toward clean and continuously cleaner energy. I think a lot of the technologies you've mentioned, Mike, that we're seeing in early stage development, like technologies that can be paired with heat recovery you mentioned, and in the interim can be fueled with natural gas and renewable gas, but can transition to hydrogen in the future. You mentioned carbon capture. We're seeing small scale carbon capture, early stage companies, and they capture CO2 from different parts of the processes, right? Like including absorption and membrane and cryogenic processes. So we're seeing some exciting new startups doing that work. And what I think is a real opportunity is getting the data centers and the labs with us because, we have a lot of leading researchers that as utilities we partner with. Like here in Illinois, we do a lot with GTI Energy and University of Illinois. We have 2 national labs here. And it's such a great way. For a lot of these efforts, utilities are pooling their R&D funds together to do collective research on this work. And it's a great way to just sort of rally around some of these critical technologies that need to be de-risked, get them in the lab, and really do some testing so we can commercialize them together.
Mina, you bring up an interesting question. So I hope I don't put anyone on the spot, but I'm interested. We talk about funding and grants and research. Is there opportunity to build out the grid and partner with, for example, the Todds of the Cyrus Ones or Mike with your clients, to actually drive forward the innovation as we build, or is that something that happens more in the academic space and we see that commercialized once it's been proven?
I'll start. We do it all the time. We'll team up with customers all the time, working with the researchers because they're the ones who have the data on it and they can simulate it and they again can de-risk some of it. So bringing those research partners along, but I think for utilities, when there is an opportunity to pilot and maybe apply together, submit a white paper together, do something to try to find additional funding to de-risk technologies, that is always an opportunity on the table. And just PSA utilities make great partners for that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we've had a lot of great conversations here. I really appreciate it's a very wide-ranging conversation, so I appreciate for everyone bringing their perspectives to the table and the questions we've been getting as well. As we head towards the end of the webinar here, I'd like to pull our panel here. We've talked a lot about the challenges that we're facing, a lot of different solutions in so many different ways. But as you look towards the future, the near future, we've just had kind of a change in administration, so everyone's thinking about what's next is top of mind for a lot of conversations. I'm curious to know for this panel, what would be your wish list? What would be the innovations, the initiatives, the policies that you'd want to focus on that you think we should really be thinking about in the short term here to make some gains on the challenges we see in increasing demand? And it'd be great to start, Robbie, with you and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think some of the early impression is there looks to be a intense focus on what I'll call energy security and resiliency, and so that's not only the types of generating sources that we're trying to put in service and bring onto the grid, but also fuel sources, and there's other ways to look at it. But the end result, I think, is there appears to be a kind of a more of a focus on it drives the focus to the more traditional generation sources as compared to what we've seen in recent years with the focus on clean energy transition. So I'll call that just an observation. In terms of what would be great to see, I think there's opportunities to help us expedite the work we need to do in several areas to meet the demand. One being kind of the permitting. These are large scale, broad ranging, impactful projects, and so the permitting and anything we can do to improve the efficiency of the permitting processes for any type of infrastructure project, I think would be a great area for focus. It really supports the idea of a secure and resilient grid. The utilities and we've identified the work that needs to get done, and now how can we be most efficient in accomplishing that work? So that's one area. And then probably similarly, another area would be the idea of new technologies. How do we advance small modular reactors and other new technologies that appear to have promise so that we can get experience and get them to, I'll call it commercial viability efficiently. So there's a lot of things that have to happen, a lot of different groups involved, but that's probably the two areas that I think would be places I would watch to see if we could see some improvement or some help. Ultimately, I think all of that, if you think about economic growth and the pursuit of utilizing new technologies and extracting the value out of new technologies, I think the grid, the ability to deliver the reliable and keeping it affordable to meet the demands that we're talking about, I think that's foundational to supporting that economic growth and that advancement of technologies to benefit our communities and our customers. That's kind of a couple of areas I would watch.
I'll just add to that. That was really well said, Robbie. And I'll just tack on, technologies that we've talked about, like heat recovery and small scale carbon capture to that list of, where it would be nice to see a little bit more federal investment as well. That was a bit constrained, I think, as of recently. And I would kind of like to see recognition both at federal and local levels about energy affordability being a part of the conversation. And I think with the advancement of clean and climate tech remaining a priority, really thinking about the pace of meeting those goals and at what cost to customers in the economy. And so I think this surge in data center demand is just a wonderful backdrop. It's a way that like the average person who's not in the energy industry is quickly learning about demand and what that means to them. And I think it's a great catalyst for a broader conversation about energy affordability.
And this will probably be the Me Too comment section. The only thing I will add is, both the previous president and our current president both issued executive orders that essentially said it is mission critical for the United States to be the preeminent, dominant developer and housing of AI, artificial intelligence, and the need to remain primacy. And of course, we had some announcement this week with DeepSeek that sort of, I think, revalidates the really importance of having U.S. domination in this potentially, massively changing technology is really important. And part of that is really having the energy infrastructure in place to enable that. And I think we've already talked about, but if I were to do a wish list, I think we've already kind of said this. It's really a robust, transmission infrastructure that can take renewable energy, which is still going to be developed, both solar and wind, and transport it efficiently to where those are needed. I think would be a wish list. And then, as Robert said, is having really substantial movement on the viability and the commercialization and approval of SMRs. I mean, that really does have some serious promise for the notion of, co-location, bring your own power, build out all of the things that are causing stress right now in that ecosystem energy development for data centers. I think there does provide promise with SMRs, and this administration this current one seems like it does want to move in that direction.
And just to really tie into what everyone had said, and if I could summarize that in 2 words, I would say be bold. And allowing, there's Todd and everyone else, that there's such a prominence in North American infrastructure and prioritizing energy sector, and we want to dominate on a global scale in AI. Is that let's show the world how we can be the forefront of change and leveraging that. And so, I don't have to repeat everyone else. That's my 2 cents on it.
Well, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. And thank you everyone else as well. We've actually reached the end of our webinar here, just a little bit early. So I do want to thank our panelists very, very much. This has been an incredibly insightful discussion. This is going to be something where I think every week we're going to see a new piece of news that's going to change the way we look at this question. And we're going to have a very different conversation a year from now than we had today. So really appreciate everyone helping us dig in and think through these challenges and solutions. To close us out here, I am going to ask Sam to give us a few closing thoughts, and I wanted to thank all of you for your time here today that have joined us to come listen. So Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Wally. I want to thank the panelists too. I thought you did an exceptional job. I learned a lot. I'd been taking some notes and I kind of prepped a very short wrap up to hopefully encapsulate some key takeaways here. So if you don't mind, I'll kind of run through it. So data centers are definitely responding to what society is asking for, and it's big. I mean, our lives are already increasingly digitized, especially coming out of the pandemic, but it is only getting supercharged through AI. I do notice that aside from, where's the communications, where are the clients, and a lot of land, now data center developers are focusing on where can we lower our time to power and make sure that it's powered reliably. So there's kind of some new constraints that are becoming top of mind. I mean, I love your comment and everyone else who echoed it that this needs to be an all-in strategy. There's no silver bullet. We need to look at all resources. Mike, I especially liked how you said, we probably need to rethink about our different risk models. If we're going to meet the 5 nines of data centers with all these different constraints, there's short-term and near-term and longer-term solutions, but how do we get practical about the way we look at the viability and timetables for the current energy solutions? I think that is a very important takeaway. We talked about some near-term solutions. We talked about more efficient natural gas and carbon sequestering to help make up some of that difference. We talked about fuel cells, a little bit of geothermal, and even being able to manage some of the on-site generation and perhaps load of the AI data center to match some of the constraints of the grid for which it's connected with. But there are other innovations. So we know that data centers probably don't specialize in how to manage the energy on site. So could energy as a service and other vendor providers make solutions that help bridge some of those gaps? There are longer term solutions that are starting to show some promise. Small modular reactors is come up again and again, as well as geothermals. I'm a big fan of nuclear, having been a prior nuclear operator. I'll put a vote in. Also renewables. There's a lot of intermittency, but storage is improving. There's different technologies. We'll start to see longer duration storage, and hopefully renewables, storage, and some advanced control technology can be a medium or longer term solution. There's been some talk about the current regulatory construct. While not perfect, perhaps it's something we can advance with increased collaboration, especially with the help of the Todds and others of the world, and Mike's. to help empathize a different perspective that perhaps is currently being overlooked in how regulatory constructs are being modified. And all of this seems to point at the fact that there's a big opportunity for all of us to continue collaborating more and more often because this is so dynamic. There is a broader purpose that's starting to surface here about where the US is going to be in dominating the AI industry and all the things that come out of that. And so how do we message that, and how do we get people on board? So that banding together for improved partnerships, I think, is just an incredible key takeaway. I'll pinch it off there, but just a quick moment about the questions, because I'm reading a lot of the questions that have come in. We've addressed a few of them, but there are some other really good questions, and we don't want to leave you stranded. We're going to take these offline and address these one by one. So please don't feel that the time you took to reflect on the conversation and pose a question is going to go dismissed. We will get to them. And with that, everybody, thank you for all your participation.
Thank you.